Welcome to our new episode of The Governance Voice. As you know, we are continuing to research and explore trending and pressing governance topics to equip governance professionals to support, guide, and influence their boards and organizations. Today, we are sitting down with Coro Strandberg, the President of Strandberg Consulting. She is a nationally recognized sustainability and social purpose leader. She advises boards, businesses, governments, and industry associations on strategies to integrate social and environmental sustainability into business models and to the marketplace. Coro is also the director of the BCLC, which adopted a social purpose last spring and sits on the Governance and Social Purpose Committee. Finally, Coro is also the co-founder of the Social Purpose Institute at United Way. My name is Letricia Fullerton, a manager of administration, education, and special projects, and I will be your host for today. Coro has been working with us on a number of collaborations. At our 2021 conference, she presented a session on the role of the board in developing and overseeing the purpose of the organization. And if you haven't watched all of our conference replays, you have the chance to still purchase it from our website up until December 31st, 2021. Please review the show notes from today's episodes in our link. In our 2020 conference, Coro also shared her insights in a session titled Purpose Governance, the missing link in how it will help address risks such as climate change, pandemics, and structural racism. Coro has been an internal part of our planning committee for our annual ESG, or Environmental, Social, and Governance conferences. So Coro, it's so great to have you here. How are you?
I'm great and really looking forward to this discussion.
Same with us. So let's just get right into it. You've been doing a lot of work on social purpose and purpose governance. What started your journey?
Well, when I reflect back, I realized that it started in the 1990s when I was on the board of directors of Van City Credit Union based out here in British Columbia. And then I became chair of the board. And during the 1990s, the board began working with management to redefine our mission and to set targets against it and deliverables that we put into the corporate strategy. I didn't realize it at that time, but that began my work in purpose governance. And I basically saw how transformational clarity on a purpose could be, and how that could help both the business grow by creating societal benefits. And we basically started to go down the path of, it's a credit union, so it's a financial institution, but basically to thinking about how a financial institution could be a force for good. And that really seized me so much that upon retirement at Van City in 2000, they have term limits there. So I was quite a young retiree, you would say. And so I basically pivoted my own career to help businesses and their boards move down the social and environmental path, which at the time we called corporate social responsibility. So basically that's what kicked off my passion in the field. I guess you would think of this idea as business as a force for good.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. Okay. So let's start right from the beginning. For those of us in the audience who may not be familiar with purpose governance, what is purpose governance and why is it important?
So in terms of what is purpose, it's the organization's meaningful reason to exist. And it clarifies that the purpose of the organization is to contribute to a better world. And it has a perspective on stakeholders in thinking about what that purpose could be. It's not the company's cause of the year, and it's not its corporate social responsibility program. It's basically the reason the organization exists. One more clarification I should make here is to distinguish between a purpose and a vision and a mission, because these are often conflated and folks get them confused.
Yes.
So a purpose would be why you exist. The mission would be what we do and how we do it, as reflected in a mission statement, what and how we therefore bring our purpose to life. And then our vision is the strategic direction we're headed. The question, why does the organization exist, is the preeminent question. And this then equips me to speak about then what's purpose governance, because then we move over into, well, what's the role of the board in regards to that? And therein is the governance dimension of it. So the purpose governance then would be the role of the board of directors in having oversight of the purpose.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. That makes sense to me.
There's a lot that flows from what I just said, but at its most basic, it's the board's role in oversight of basically bringing that purpose to life through strategy and culture and other things that I'll unpack over the course of our time together. But
Okay.
that's really how you would think of purpose and what differentiates it from a vision and a mission.
You mentioned corporate responsibility a little bit earlier. Would you be able to explain to us how purpose governance is different and what are the key areas of focus?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so corporate social responsibility has been, a practice of organizations probably for, 20 or 30 years. And it's basically where the organization looks to see what its social and environmental impacts and risks are.
Okay.
And the organization seeks to improve their social and environmental risks and impacts, like all in. And by the way, it's similar to environmental social governance, ESG, as well, which ESG tends to look a little bit more at what are the risks that the organization faces, what are the social and environmental risks that the organization faces, and how does the business address them. So these are ongoingly very important priorities for business, is to be identifying and managing their environmental and social risks, improving their social and environmental performance and practices, and having an eye on what stakeholders think of the organization and make sure that they're addressing stakeholder concerns. So all in, that's corporate social responsibility and ESG. So a purpose differentiates from those two practice areas in that it's why the organization exists. So CSR is not why the organization exists, and ESG is not why the organization exists. They are approaches to improving the organization's social and environmental risks and impacts and performance. A purpose sits on top of the architecture of the firm. It basically states why the organization exists, and then it would have goals, targets, and metrics relative to its purpose, because it's trying to implement its purpose. And some of those could relate to a CSR or an ESG priority, but basically the purpose is from the top of the firm or organization down into the business, whereas CSR and ESG are sort of at other levels of the business and not the reason the organization exists.
Okay.
So many organizations already have CSR and ESG practices in place.
Right.
And once the organization adopts its new fresh purpose or refines it or codifies it or updates it or refreshes it, once it does that, it would then go through an exercise of looking at its CSR to make sure that the CSR can align with and help deliver on the purpose. So it might then help the organization focus its CSR, prioritize its CSR, perhaps move out of CSR areas that were not so relevant to the purpose. And then the practices on the CSR will help the business be able to prioritize what it should focus on in its social purpose. And it might even already have some metrics that the business can adopt.
Okay. All right. Okay. That makes sense. So we've been hearing a lot about this term, purpose governance in the governance space. What is driving the current purpose governance trend?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there are a number of factors that are driving this. I think preeminent is employees.
Okay.
And no matter what you call it, talent war, labor shortage, there is competition for employees. And we're especially seeing, people call it the Great Resignation. They call it an employee strike. Employees are reluctant to go back working for firms that are not aligned with their values. Employees coming out of the pandemic want to leave firms that don't align with their values. And even prior to the pandemic, there was a trend for employees. It's often attributed to millennial and younger employees, though it's really a concern of all employees, were wanting to more and more work for firms that they felt that they could support and wanted to bring their time and effort and labor to and passion. And so businesses started to realize that they needed to, and also if they wanted to retain their employees, if they wanted to retain and attract and engage and inspire employees, that they needed to move into having a higher purpose as the reason the business exists. And so that's been a very important driver of businesses moving into this space. Another driver has been investors. Really, as I've seen it, sort of kicked off by Larry Fink, who is the CEO of BlackRock, the world's largest asset management firm.
Right.
And they've got over like $10 trillion US in assets, just to give you a size of its magnitude. And every year, Larry Fink issues a letter to the CEOs of the companies in which he's invested in which his firm is invested in. And starting in 2018, and every year since, this CEO letter speaks to his priority as an investor, that the businesses that he invested have a social purpose. And he's basically sees it that society is demanding that companies, whether you're public or private, serve a social purpose. And he believes that to prosper over time, to be successful over time, every company must not only deliver financial performance, but also show how it makes a positive contribution to society. So Larry Fink sees it, and his investment firm sees it, that businesses that have clarified their societal purpose and are bringing it to life through strategy will be more viable over the long term. And long-term investors want to be invested in this kind of company. Another investor proof point comes from a research, or is revealed in some research that was conducted by Coro Strandberg, which is an investor shareholder services firm.
Right.
And they, in the spring, they issued a report on which they surveyed the world's largest institutional asset managers, representing over 25% of capital markets. So a really big swath of capital markets responded to this survey.
Right.
And they asked the question of these investors whether they thought that the board should have and disclose a purpose. And 85% of these investors, representing 25% of capital markets, thought that boards should have and disclose a purpose. So that's a pretty significant group.
Right. Yeah.
And related to that, the second follow-on question was, and what would you do if boards don't have and disclose a purpose? And they said, we would engage with the board. So these are very early indicators of what investors are interested in. But now what we're seeing because of this is organizations like Directors College in Canada or the Institute for Corporate Directors are starting to bring these ideas of purpose oversight and purpose governance through their educational platforms to boards of directors. So educational platforms, including like yours, are becoming a driver of organizations picking up on purpose governance. And I've mentioned already the pandemic has been a driver, but I think not only has the pandemic shed light on for employees on their wanting to have meaning at work and to work for an employer that creates and fosters meaning at work. Not only are we seeing that with employees, but I think a lot of business leaders and owners came to realize through the pandemic how essential their stakeholders were to their success.
Right.
I think they found themselves making a lot of pivots, if you will, to serve society, whether that was healthy and safe workplaces or reformulating sort of products to create, sanitizers or personal protective equipment and on and on. The huge pivot that business did that was basically society serving to address the pandemic has sort of opened up this space in business where they realized that it was motivating of partners, it attracted, government partnerships, it attracted community partnerships, and engaged their employees and inspired their employees. Well, I think a lot of businesses have just come to understand how important it is to be a part of society, to be centered in society, and to find a route by which they can unlock more of their assets.
Right. Yeah.
Contribute to society.
So just a question that's off the top of my head here. With the missions, you mentioned the mission statement, and you did describe the different and how the mission statement is different from your purpose, your purpose statement. But how can they often be blurred? Like, if an organization says, well, my mission is to do this, is that not their purpose?
Well, here we've got a bit of a terminology sort of issue.
Right.
There's one organization that I work with called the Cooperators.
Right.
And they're a Canadian company, and they have a mission to enable financial security for Canadians in their communities, and they call that their mission.
Right.
So when I look at their mission, I would say that's a purpose. Why do we exist? We exist to enable financial security, etc. So you will find organizations perhaps using the language of mission, but if it's their North Star, and if it's the reason they exist,
right, then it would be forefront.
Yeah. Yes. And if it's driving the organization's strategy and culture, then arguably they're using the language interchangeably. Some other terms, by the way, people call it higher purpose, larger purpose, grander purpose. So we see, other kinds of terminology in the space as well. It's called social purpose. I see it called a sustainable purpose.
Yeah.
I see it's called a societal purpose. So there are these sort of definitional matters that need to be kind of wrestled with, but it is the meaningful reason that the organization exists. And if you wanted to call that a mission, that's okay. Then you would still have to tackle the question, how do we, the other definition I was sharing about a mission statement is how, what we do and how we do it, what we do and how we do it.
Okay, so it's just pretty much how the company, each company would resonate with whatever it is that they're doing then.
Yeah, though I would have to say, given the energy that's going into the purpose of the organization, I think eventually referring to this as purpose will become more helpful because it's more clear to everybody. It's why we exist, whereas mission, not so clear.
Okay, all right. Okay, so for people and for organizations who are wanting to adapt purpose governance into their practices and into organizations, how would they do that? Like where would they begin?
Well, notably, Governance Professionals of Canada has more and more materials and resources. That would be an excellent starting point, particularly for governance professionals. So you put out a couple of briefing documents already from your conferences. Your conferences in the last couple of years are already addressing that. You mentioned your education program. So your education program has a module that addresses purpose governance as well. And even so, you have an award. One of your recognition awards includes purpose governance, so it provides some insights as to what's expected there. So anyways, just following, and you put out your newsletter often has, new reports and education and materials and resources. So anyways, follow Governance Professionals of Canada.
We're on top of it.
But I might want to point another resource or a couple. One is, earlier it was mentioned that I was a co-founder of the Social Purpose Institute at United Way. And that's an organization that's helping businesses get a social purpose. And then it's helping businesses implement the social purpose. And it has programs to help employees learn about what that means and help employees figure out how to apply it to their functions and their roles. So I would just say that that's another resource. And they have a newsletter that you can follow, which goes out every other week. So a lot of purpose materials and resources go out there. That'll be another great channel, I would think. And it's hosting a summit on the topic, November 17, 18. Letricia, you are speaking at it.
Yes, I am.
A virtual summit, and there's over 60 speakers all talking about this subject. And it would be a great entry point for teams, governance teams or executive teams or other business people, CSR people that might want to learn about it and bring the insights back to their own organization. And finally, I would say GPC and I were working on something we're calling a purpose governance framework, which is a set of 5 steps that boards could take to refine or codify or formalize or adopt a purpose. And then about 20 steps to actually go through a process of implementing a purpose. So watch for that. That should be coming out in the next month or so.
Yes, absolutely.
In addition to the upcoming purpose governance framework, the ISO, the International Standards Organization, has just adopted ISO 37000, which just in September. And this is a set of best practices in corporate governance. So it covers the gamut of all governance practices, but it starts with purpose.
Yeah,
governance.
That's a big deal.
And it's a very big deal. And it talks about the board's role vis-a-vis the purpose and vis-a-vis stakeholders and on and on. There's just so much in that toolkit that is available now that you can buy off the ISO platform and start to work through the best practices there. So that's another, I think, excellent resource we will be hearing more and more about coming up.
Awesome. That's really good. You mentioned that in our, our education program, we do discuss it in detail, but what is the role of the governance professional and the board in adapting and supporting purpose governance within their organization?
Yeah, so first what I might do is talk about the role of the board and what they're doing in this space. And then I'll move over to talk about, how does the governance professional support them and equip them for, enhanced practices in this area. So the top job for the board would be to make sure that the business has a clearly articulated and defined purpose that is relevant to its business. And that is, let's call it future fit. It would need to be a purpose that you could imagine operating under at least for, let's say, 20 years or something like that as to why the business exists.
Okay, sorry, you call that future fit?
Fit for the future, relevant to the future. It's something that the company or the organization would steer in the future over time. So perhaps there is an old mission statement lying around. You would want to take a look at that and elevate it to a purpose statement. And then you would want to make sure it was going to be relevant to steer against in the coming, decade. So future fit. And then you would work with management to define it or update it. A lot of organizations say that it's in our DNA, but we haven't formally expressed it. So sometimes it's just a matter of formalizing it. So it can become clear, and then employees and others know how to operate against it. So that clarity is really important. And it's usually a pretty simple statement. Just going back to the cooperators, we exist to enable financial security for Canadians and their communities, just as an example. It would need to have underlined that simple statement, a definition of what it means. So what does financial security mean? What does who do we mean by Canadians? And what do we mean by communities, just to use that as an example. But it would need to be defined. And then it would, typically it's good to have a further statement that is like your narrative. How does that affect your business model? And what value does that bring to your customers? What value does that bring to your organization? And what value does that bring to society?
Right. No, because that's ultimately why I asked that question in regards to whether it can be blurred, because some organizations already say that they're already doing this. Like, why would I need to create a purpose statement if it's already there? I'm already doing it. But I guess it's not that clear, and we just need to make it more, define it more, as you said.
Yeah, I sort of use the word codify it, but formalize it. Formalize it.
Right.
And so I guess what I was saying is you would have a sort of a simple statement of why we exist that would be enduring, your North Star, and then under it you would have some definitional material to communicate it. And in refining your purpose or updating it or adopting a new one, you'd be asking questions of your stakeholders, like what greater role do you believe our organization can play in the world? Perhaps you might be asking the question, what human need could we meet? Is there a wrong we could make right?
Right.
What would the world lose? What would the
Right.
world lose if our organization didn't exist?
Right.
So anyways, it would be an asking of these kinds of questions of stakeholders to really go deep and excavate.
Yeah, those are some deep questions. Those are deep questions that you really should sit down and ask yourselves as your organizations, why you're here, in order for you to move forward.
Yes, why you're here, exactly, just as you said. And so anyway, so there'd be that kind of a process. And also, if I might just add, at the Social Purpose Institute, the program we set up there, we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which is goals that have been adopted by the UN to steer society towards a sustainable future by 2030. And there are 17 of these. So we encourage businesses to look at these 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the world and prioritize those that would be most relevant for its own business, because not all 17 would be relevant. And then we encourage businesses to look at all the assets and competencies and skills and reach and platform and influence and scale that they have that they could bring to address the societal priorities that they and their stakeholders think that they can influence through their purpose. And then right where the two intersect is where your sweet spot is for your purpose. Anyway, just a little bit about how you go about setting one. And of course, management would do most of this work, and the board would be engaged with management in probably agreeing that we should have a purpose, and then agreeing with management on the process to define it. And then there'd be some touch points with the board before it was brought forward in adoption. And I think an earlier step for the board would be education, of course.
Right. Of course.
Let's, you know,
they gotta understand it before they can implement it, right?
Some education, not just on what it is, what it means, and the significance to our organization. Why should we get one? But what's the business case for getting one? What's the value proposition for getting one? And what's the time of getting one? And the board should have some education with management first to see the need for it, and then go through the exercise of adopting it. And then once they've adopted it, you know, frankly, then the work begins.
Right.
Because now that you've formalized your reason, your meaningful reason to exist, then a number of implementation priorities come to the fore.
Right.
And maybe I'll just sort of describe a few implementation priorities, which are all in the realm of board governance.
Okay, go ahead.
Once you have that purpose approved by the board, then you would want to have a corporate vision. So if that's our enduring purpose, what's the strategic direction we want to set for our organization, say in the next 10 years? It shouldn't be shorter than 10. So where are we headed? So we've got our purpose, which is why we exist every day. It's enduring. But what is the corporate vision against that purpose? A lot of businesses have visions already, corporate vision statements. So it would be to go back into that and now refresh that also. To refresh that, because we have this new purpose and you want your vision to deliver on your purpose. So that's a fast follow in the work. And another fast follow in the work coming off of the corporate vision is strategy.
Okay, how does that work in?
Yeah, so now that we know what our vision is to advance us on our purpose, then where do we want to be in 3 years?
Right, okay.
10-year vision. So you backcast from your vision to 3 years, and now it's 3 years out. And then what are the metrics that we want to put in our strategy, and what are the deliverables in our strategy? How does that affect capital allocation? How does that affect risk management? And how does that affect employee engagement and other things? So now you can see from your corporate vision, now you've got a strategy. And then once it's in your strategy, of course, and you've got metrics in your strategy, then it starts to float into executive compensation.
Right, okay, yeah.
Now you'll expect to see executives compensated for achievement against the metrics that reflect your vision and your purpose. So instead of compensation, then becomes influenced, and also the CEO's performance goals.
Right.
So coming up now, we're going to look at the annual performance objectives for the CEO.
Right.
What is going to ripple out of your purpose and out of your vision and out of your strategy that's going to become a performance objective for the CEO in the next year. So you would expect ongoingly ongoingly every year that refreshment of the CEO performance objectives and evaluation of the CEO's performance against those objectives now will start to also evaluate against the purpose and achievement of the purpose goals and things.
Okay, all right.
Another area, because while we're talking about the CEO, it also affects succession planning. Because now that we have clarified our purpose and it's embedded into our strategy, there are likely some new skills and competencies that we would need on our executive bench and rippling into the organization to help execute on our purpose. And so now the board needs to look to see in the succession planning framework how, in addition to the traditional competencies and skill sets and experience that we've been looking for, now we want to make sure that we have in succession planning purpose factored into that as well. And related to that, if you're going to market to recruit a new CEO, this is now going to go into the CEO success profile. And then when you go to hire your recruitment firm to help you engage or find your new CEO, you want a recruitment firm that understands this whole area of being purpose driven. And so now we want to hire a CEO who can do all those original things that we would have always wanted of our CEO, but now you want a purpose driven CEO. And so there are certain types of experiences and behaviors and insights and values that you want from your CEO. So that's going to have probably a material impact on the success profile for the CEO. And then maybe 2 more points in terms of the role of the board and how it sort of filters into the organization. 3 more points, because I'm starting now to think of all the different committees. So I guess I'm thinking of your audit committee.
That's
so
okay. Go for it.
Yeah, go for it.
Give us all the information.
Yeah, it filters into the audit committee, because now the audit committee has to validate performance against the metrics that are your purpose metrics. And then if you're disclosing your performance of the firm to capital markets and stakeholders, the audit committee wants to make sure that there's a good, robust disclosure of your purpose metrics as well. So it affects disclosure. And then it affects, so that committee will have some skin in the game too, and as well the HR, the compensation committee, insofar as another role of the board working with management would be to adopt a new set of corporate values.
Right.
Because what you want to be doing, of course, is making sure that your purpose now is part of the culture of the organization.
Exactly. Yeah.
So take another look at the values and let's make sure that 1 or more of your values are directly matched to your purpose as a signal to employees and to other types of recognition and reward and compensation programs in the competency programs in the organization that you want to have your values aligned.
Right. So it impacts everything.
Yeah, it does. It's quite a holistic approach to governance and then to executive deliverables.
Right.
We're coming out with that purpose governance framework shortly. And, the tool will go into this and more practices, but this is the way in which it's quite a holistic undertaking, because you don't want a social purpose that's inauthentic.
Right. Yeah.
It cannot be a tagline. If it's a tagline, if it just sits on your website and doesn't go anywhere,
It doesn't do, or you don't do anything with it or about it, then it's pointless kind of.
And it will be disingenuous, and it will foster cynicism, mistrust, and it won't generate the benefits that you would achieve from it.
Right.
I just maybe one more, while there are many points to make, I have just one more point to make, which I think is really material for boards to be thinking about, which is stakeholders. And it's another important area for boards and management to develop or flesh out once you've updated or amended your purpose or refined it or codified it, which is your stakeholder relationships. Because no business, no organization can achieve its purpose on its own.
Right.
No business can bring its business to life on its own. It relies on stakeholders, suppliers and customers, employee, governments.
Takes a village.
It takes a village to raise a company.
It takes,
And it takes a village to raise a social purpose company. And so once you have its newly defined purpose, then another area of investigation is to identify, okay, so who are the stakeholders that we need now to implement our purpose? And I suspect that you will start to identify new stakeholders. I mean, one I didn't even mention is universities and academia and whatnot. They could become now a partner in helping bring some aspects of the social purpose to life, just as an example. But so there'll be new stakeholders needed, maybe even stakeholders we'll need in the future. So it's not just about collaborating with current stakeholders, but future stakeholders. So this will then beget a process for board and management to think about who are main stakeholders and what are the goals that we have with our stakeholders. And then how does the board have oversight of those stakeholder relationships to fulfill the purpose? So that was just a final point that I wanted to make there.
That's a lot for a board, which is good, keeps them busy. So how does that impact the governance professional and what's their role?
Well, I think these days, at this time, the role of the governance professional is firstly to get their own education. I think that's pretty obvious. If you're listening to this podcast, check, getting your education.
Yeah, you're getting education right now.
And follow GPC's, work in this area, but, the education, and then self-education. And then at this phase for board and management teams, of course, bringing this to the attention of management as well. And see what management is thinking about moving in this direction. They are probably already following trends in this area. And then, but in terms of the board, starting to provide educational material for the board. And perhaps even an educational session for the board, articles for the board, alert the chair of the board, if you've got that kind of a relationship, about sort of this new frontier of best practices in corporate governance. Perhaps the chair of the governance committee, which would be a relationship that you could probably readily tap into in terms of best practices in governance. And I think in addition to education, I think a main opportunity is the governance manual, which will be looked at. I think typically committee TORs are looked at every year. So, and refreshed. So that would be a time to consider refreshing some committee mandates. Another one would be the board role and responsibility, or the terms of reference for the board. That to clarify that the board has responsibility for oversight of the purpose. So update the board role and responsibility to bring in oversight of the purpose. So refresh manuals, terms of reference of committees and boards, and then maybe even the board self-assessment questionnaire. You could put some questions in there. Does the board know, why the business exists? And does the board believe that the business or the organization is doing a good job in implementing its purpose, or these kinds of things? So you could put some evaluation questions into the survey. And I think that would start to unlock some kinds of questions.
Right. And I'm sure that the conversation and even to start by starting this conversation on purpose governance, it's a far better conversation than I'm sure a lot of the conversation that we've been having for the past 2 years about everyone's just so COVID related. This making a shift to adapting a social purpose or a purpose statement is a far better conversation to have, to uplift and to do better for your organizations, especially going off the heels of what everyone has just experienced.
Yeah, and maybe there's two other quick little ones. One would be the skills matrix.
Right.
I think you might want to
add something in there as well.
Have something in there, and also the RFPs that the governance professional puts out, and frankly, any committee puts out, you will now want to have embedded in your RFPs criteria that your consultant or the service provider that's going to provide a service for you has expertise in this area. Like now, in terms of executive compensation, if you've got a compensation advisor, you would now want them to have purpose, governance, incentive, expertise, and on and on. So bringing them into, if you're going to update your governance manuals, etc., make sure that you're hiring a consultant team that has purpose, governance, specialization. So yeah,
that's a lot for. Is that it? Is that all that a GP would have to do? Is that?
There'd be
Is there
more, but
anything-
again, when you see the purpose governance framework that's coming out, I think it will make clear what are the various touch points for the governance professional.
Sounds like a lot of work, a little bit, but it's good work, as I said, I think this type of conversation is a much better conversation to be having now, based on what we've been just dealing with.
Well, also, if I might, because we've been in a short-term crisis, it is the role of the board to set the tone at the top,
Mhm.
and it's the role of the board to think long-term.
Right.
And it is these two responsibilities really rest with them. And so, purpose is set as tone at the top, and then thinking long-term. This process that we're talking about here is to equip the organization to thrive in the long term.
Right.
So if your board is only looking quarterly or just focused on short term, this might be hard to make this shift, but this is where the board comes in, is to bring the long-term perspective to the table. These are long-term questions for success of the organization.
So you've been talking a lot about long-term, Coro. What is the business case for long-term succession?
Yeah, so the business case, the value proposition for organizations to adopt and bring to life their societal purpose. The value proposition is a long-term value proposition. It's about how to position the organization for success in the medium to long term. There more and more, like almost every day, there's a new report I'm reading on what is the business case for moving in this direction. I've already spoke earlier to the employee attraction, retention, engagement, huge business driver there, and values to be gained. Customers also, more and more are expected to be looking to put their buying power with firms and products that they can trust, and with firms and products that are aligned with their own values. So customers more and more are going to be using this as a differentiator. Also, social purpose companies pivot their approach to customers where they can start to create movements around their brand.
Okay.
And where the customer becomes the brand advocate and champions the brand to peers and friends and influencers. So by moving in this direction and creating a customer movement around your brand, you'll attract more customers to you because your customers will be talking about you. So that's customers. There is starting to come to the foreground that businesses that have and implement a societal purpose are financially more profitable. And we are expecting, with this shift to investors being interested in this, that it will become a route to attracting investor capital.
Right.
And there are a lot of impact investors out there who would be looking to invest in companies that have a social purpose. So you can tap into new capital streams that are out there. And also you can build trust in your organization. Because when you shift from a profit first model to a purpose first model and start to execute on it, more and more of your partners and government and suppliers, customers, employees, they will start to trust you more.
Yeah, definitely.
That will bring untold benefits for the firm in the future. Having a social purpose also creates a lens of innovation, because now you're bringing your social purpose into product formulation and market acquisition, customer acquisition, just new ways of doing business. So it starts to open up innovation in the organization. And also it will attract suppliers to you who might want to co-innovate with you in some of these areas. And a very significant benefit of having a social purpose is that it helps businesses navigate through turbulent times, because you've got this enduring North Star that you're headed towards. So both employees are prepared to go through rounds of change management because they know why the company is headed for. And then through crises like the pandemic, having a social purpose North Star helps you make efficient decisions, helps you, decentralize decisions, because everybody knows the lens on the decisions that they should be making. So it will help you manage your risks, and help inspire employees, and then they would bring their best selves to work.
Yeah, I like that. I like the North Star. I like that analogy. That sums it up a lot, for at least for me, because it just gives organizations, like, even as an employee, you'll talk more about it, and there's more positivity, and there's more things that this is what you're aiming to get to, and this is what you're working towards, working with working with those organizations. So that idea of a North Star, that resonates with me. So I like that a lot. I understand that you are currently sitting on a board that has introduced purpose governance. Can you tell us a little bit about the process and how it has impacted this organization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm on the board of directors of BC Lotteries Corporation. We go by BCLC. It's a crown corporation based in British Columbia.
Okay.
And we have a responsibility to manage and conduct the gambling in British Columbia.
Right.
And we have a very strong player health orientation, where we want no one to be harmed by using our products.
Mm-hmm.
So we had for years a very strong corporate social responsibility program. And in the last 2 years, the board really started taking a look at CSR, and they thought that they wanted to refresh what it saw as the organization's ability to bring greater social value to the province.
Right.
Beyond the revenues that we were generating that would fund provincial government programming in healthcare and education. So we had some education. We had an hour-long presentation on social purpose, and board and management decided that they wanted to move in this direction.
Okay.
So we then commissioned maybe a year-long process to define our social purpose. Along the way, management recommended to the board a restructuring of the organization. Mm-hmm. To focus us, to make us more customer-centered, to be more integrated as one BCLC, and
Right.
also to adopt a social purpose. And so the new corporate restructuring created a new role called the Chief Social Purpose Officer.
Okay.
Social Purpose Officer, and we also got marketing and customer experience, and VP player experience. And so he is the one who started the work on updating our social purpose. And meanwhile, that work was underway. The governance committee that I sit on was itself refreshing the governance manual. We hired a consultant to help us update the governance manual, all of it. And because we're in the process of updating the governance manual, we updated the board roles and responsibilities. It say that the board had oversight of CSR. So we took that out and we replaced it by saying the board has responsibility for oversight of the purpose. And then, of course, we have in there, it has financial responsibility oversight and risk responsibility oversight. We also wrote in that it had oversight of stakeholder relations, and it had oversight of ESG. So it was quite a reformatting of the board roles and responsibilities. And then we had a pre-existing governance and corporate social responsibility committee, and we changed that to governance and social purpose.
Okay, all right.
And so now that committee has oversight of the social purpose, which is more strategic than our CSR program was. So it sort of made more sense for the board to have oversight of the social purpose. So working with management, now that we've adopted the social purpose, we have something we call an implementation plan, which is quarter by quarter rollout of implementation of our social purpose. And we have not yet refreshed our corporate vision. We have one, but it has not been refreshed to reflect the social purpose. So we're going to go through an exercise next year to update the corporate vision. Okay. We did update the corporate values. And so now we have corporate value. I think they're integrity, respect, and we adopted a new one. It used to say social responsibility, and now it says community. And so it's now more of a purpose-facing corporate value that we updated. And then management's now starting to educate employees who are consulted in developing purpose. We're now educating them on what the purpose is and how it impacts their functions. And so anyways, it just gives you a bit of a sense as to the work that we've pursued. We've also prioritized a program to refresh our understanding of who our stakeholders are now that we have this new social purpose.
Right.
The aim of,
And this is all a part of your framework, the framework.
Yeah.
So with you sitting on this board, you played like a major role in regards to getting a lot of these, realigning a lot of these roles within the board.
Yeah, so I've had some experience that I was able to bring to the table. Yeah, albeit, this is new territory. So,
Right.
this process that I'm describing, this holistic governance process I'm describing is sort of, well, certainly new for us. I think it would be new for a lot of organizations. So there's a lot of room for innovation here.
Right.
And so, the Chief Social Purpose Officer, all of our executive are aligned to our social purpose, as is our CEO, et cetera. So there's a lot of people who are bringing to the table their ideas on how to execute on the social purpose.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Very good.
In addition to or to inform our work at BC Lotteries, we draw a lot of inspiration from another Canadian company, which is Maple Leaf Foods.
Mm-hmm.
Maple Leaf Foods, a few years ago now, adopted a social purpose to raise the good in food. And again, they've described what they mean by raise and good and food, getting at things like sodium and hormones in the meat products and how their animals are raised and this kind of thing. So they've got a lot of good sort of proof points under raise the good in food that they've described. And then they've also adopted a corporate vision to be the most sustainable protein company. I'm not sure if it's in the world, but it might be in the world. So you hear right away that a meat product company is seeking to be the most sustainable protein company.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so that's how the vision can support the purpose. They go together. And so now Maple Leaf Foods is basically going through a transformation of its own product lineup to offer more protein-based products to their customers. And they're using this, their purpose and their vision to acquire businesses that are offering protein, plant-based proteins, and make that part of their product lineup. So it's quite transformational for the organization, and you can tell their purpose and their corporate vision that they're really paying a lot of attention to societal trends.
Right.
And they want to make sure that they've got the products that society will need in the future, not just the products that they're looking for today. So it can be quite transformational for a business, and that would be an example of how, because they're further ahead than BC Lotteries is in bringing their purpose to life. So we look to them a lot for how they execute in this area.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. So how do organizations measure their success in implementing these practices? And if you can just elaborate, can it be measured?
Well, that's an excellent question. I mentioned earlier this idea of you want to have your purpose to put it into your strategy. So if it's going to go into your strategy, you're going to need metrics and measures against it, especially if it's also going to be a route to incentivizing executives, et cetera.
Right.
So this matter of measurement is what needs to be tackled, and it's complex. There are, in my experience, what I see businesses do is sort of have two types of metrics, or that they're working on developing two types of metrics against their purpose. One would be what I would call process metrics. And it's how the company internally is managing its processes to bring its social purpose to life. So some of those process metrics might be, what percent of our workforce has been educated on our social purpose and understand and are aware of it. That could be a process metric. Another process metric would be how many of our employees feel equipped and empowered to bring their purpose to life. So that would be another process metric. Another process metric might be what percent of our brands are activating on our purpose.
Right.
Because maybe you take 5 a year or some number a year, or maybe you've got an iconic brand that's doing it but not the other brands. So how are we going to pivot the other brands in this kind of thing? What percent of our customers are we engaging with on our purpose? Because maybe there's some initiative that you want your customers to support and collaborate with you on. And on and on. So these would be sort of internal process type metrics.
Okay.
External, then there's a matter of external metrics, like how have you moved the needle on your social purpose? So this is where you'd go back to thinking about, raise the good in food. How do you measure that? And then to be able to measure that, you have to be able to define that. And similarly with Maple Leaf Foods, when they say that we want to be the most sustainable protein company, well, you can imagine what the metrics would be against that.
Right.
So there'll be some internal process metrics to help you see how far you've embedded it in your organization, and then these sort of external facing ones where you've materially moved the needle on your societal purpose.
What can the board or the governance professionals do to ensure or encourage purpose governance goes beyond compliance? And just to add a little bit more to that, how can we embed purpose governance into the spirit and culture of our organization?
Maybe a few brief points to highlight a few things I said earlier. But it's necessary to go beyond compliance on social purpose. Like really, the social purpose is an aspiration. And employees should feel excited and motivated and unlocked to bring their best selves to work, to bring innovation to the table, to reimagine the organization and how it brings its products to markets and how the organization serves stakeholders. So it's a real opening to employees who should not think of it as a compliance or even a checkbox measure. So it will be important to invest in employee education on your social purpose and what they can do in their role or their function to bring their purpose to life. I think over time, what you would expect to see is that job descriptions will be updated to name what the employees are doing in that department or that function on social purpose. So we will see job descriptions updated. I think we will see the employer brand will be updated. So now the employer will be explicitly including its purpose as a reason why an employee might want to work there. I think what the business would do would embed social purpose into the employee experience and the employee life cycle. So right from, the recruitment ad to the job interview and the questions that get asked to the onboarding letter, to the employee orientation, to team meetings, and right through to whether the employee on retirement is maintained as an alumni or a volunteer of the organization and continues to contribute to the organized social purpose. So just right away, the whole employee experience. And I think HR would be working then to make sure that it was factored right through the employee experience. But I think starting with education and helping the employee to understand how they can bring the purpose to life in their role.
Okay, all right, that's good. I have just a question for you. Toot your own horn. Do you consider yourself a trailblazer for purpose governance?
Oh, well, okay, I'll take that. Well, it's interesting when I mentioned my role back at Van City when I was on the board, basically through my 30s, and I sort of cut my teeth on this idea of defining the purpose of an organization, then bringing it to life. And it came away. I think I was in the vanguard at the time. Like we back then call it corporate social responsibility. And I first heard about that in 1992. And so when I went out to help other businesses, at that time, we called it corporate social responsibility. I was in the vanguard of that. And that allowed me to just only support other organizations that wanted to be leaders. So I've had the privilege in my career to only be working with organizations that wanted to be leaders. And so that kept me on the forefront of leadership. And as such, it's kept me in the vanguard of where CSR, how it became ESG, and now how it's evolving to take on this higher mantle of purpose. But I should say that because of my experience at Van City on the board and my expertise in corporate social responsibility, I, on behalf of the Conference Board of Canada, I wrote the first international study of what we called CSR governance back in 2007-8. And Conference Board of Canada said a few years ago that it was one of their most downloaded reports.
Wow.
So it was sort of called CSR governance, and it was back in, 2007 and 8. And then when purpose governance, when I started to see the pivot to purpose, then it caused me to look at all those old materials and to refresh them from a purpose governance lens.
Standpoint.
So I've been pleased to work with Governance Professionals of Canada, really in, curating and narrating and exploring and innovating into this space, so that, governance professionals could be, right on top of an emergent governance trend. Best practice, which is now being, codified in the ISO 37000. So this is going to ripple into Canada, and it's going to become an expectation that boards have defined a meaningful reason to exist that addresses humanity's needs, if you will, so that they can be relevant and fit for the future. And governance professionals are in probably the most pivotal seat in an organization
in order
to help bring these ideas to the foreground and help working with management, of course, to bring these ideas to boards so that boards could, adapt them to their own purposes and refine their own pathway, and quite quickly move into a place where they can not only create value for their organizations, but for society over the long term. And if we can imagine in Canada, where organizations enabled and supported by governance professionals to have best practices in this area, we will basically be unlocking business assets, organizational assets for a greater social good. And in the face of the crises that we confront today, the climate emergency, rising inequality, increased awareness about systemic racism, the need to address Indigenous reconciliation, the pandemic, etc. These kinds of crises are not going to go away, and more are ahead. And so governance professionals can help their organizations navigate and steer, and also bring their resources to the table in a way that also creates profits for the firm and helps attract investment capital and partners and collaborators and employees so that that firm can grow. And then Canadian businesses then will be able to grow with this new perspective on why they exist. And it's quite an exciting time to be a governance.
Absolutely. And it's like no two organizations will have the same journey. Some may take a bit slower, but as you said, this will become a standard. And it's just about us continuing to have that conversation and or even to start the conversation, because purpose governance is something that is definitely new. But we need to have that conversation in order to propel over to that next level within governance. So how would one find out more information about you and your work and what you're doing for the purpose governance?
Well, my website, corostrandberg.com, and I very actively put thought leadership out, regularly on this topic and other topics in this area. And that would be a route to follow me and to subscribe to my newsletter or my blog, and of course LinkedIn. But I'm going to stay the course with Governance Professionals of Canada. As
you said, like you publish a lot of stuff in our newsletter, and you have been one of our faculty since the education program has started, and now to have the purpose governance within the program, it's exciting. And I know it's a question that comes up a lot, and sitting in on those sessions, it's a question that is it's being asked, and people really want to know how to get this started. So it's good that you're here. It's good that you're working alongside with us. We thank you for that. To get this information out there to those who really want to hear it and to those who want to implement it. So this is good. Thank you. Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Great. I enjoyed the opportunity for the conversation, and I look forward to seeing everyone on the Purpose Trail.
Yeah, it's definitely a pleasure sitting down here and learning even more from you today. Coro was greatly appreciated. We want to thank you and thank our listeners for their support of this podcast. There's also a lot of takeaways from this episode that will empower your organization and your board. So if you're really enjoying this podcast, please feel free to follow, share, and like this podcast and our other episodes. Also, if you need any information about Coro and Purpose Governance, we'll have information in the show notes of our episode. Also, stay tuned or subscribe to our Governance Matters newsletter. A lot of information is also published in there. You can also go to our website, which is Governance Professionals of Canada, www.gpcanada.org. And there's a lot of information there as well on this topic. So thank you, Coro. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you again soon.